it's a story still worth telling, one that has transcended the world of sports to become an indelible part of our nation's history. If you're not familiar with the story, back during the 1926 World Series, New York Yankees legend Babe Ruth autographed a baseball for a New Jersey boy who was fighting for his life after being kicked in the head by a horse. On the ball, the Babe wrote, "I'll knock a homer for you." And in his very next game, the fourth game of the series, Ruth would hit not just one but 3 home runs as he led the Yankees to victory over the St. Louis Cardinals that day. As for the boy who received the ball, 11-year-old Johnny Sylvester made a full recovery and was able to repay the Babe for his kindness 2 decades later. Their story is now the subject of a new documentary titled "I'll Knock a Homer for You," the timeless story of Johnny Sylvester and Babe Ruth, airing on 13. Here's a look.
The day of reckoning had come for Babe Ruth to deliver on his promise. It was Game 4 of the 1926 World Series, held at Sportsman's Park in St. Louis. The Yankees were down in the series 2-1. No one but the Babe himself will ever know the pressure he faced that day. He'd made a promise the day before. Now he had to make good on it.
And joining me now with more on this story is Johnny Sylvester's grandnephew and the film's director, Andrew Lilly. Andrew, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So, Andrew, you have obviously a very close personal relationship to this story, but why did you decide to immortalize it in your documentary?
Well, the story itself has always been in my family history, so there was always a bit of mystique about the story as well in the public consciousness. It was depicted in Hollywood movies, but they always embellished things. My thought was the actual story itself was amazing enough to begin with. It didn't need any embellishments. And my documentary, I actually wanted to set the record straight on what happened between Babe Ruth and my great-uncle, Johnny Sylvester.
Yeah. You know, I knew the story, like everybody knows the story, but I had misconceptions. For example, I thought that the Babe had actually gone to the hospital and made the promise to the kid at the hospital
Yes.
before hitting the 3 home runs. A lot of people have misconceptions about
Yeah.
the story. Why?
I think, partly because it happened so long ago. We're talking about something that happened 100 years ago. And
Almost, yeah.
and also due to the fact that Johnny Sylvester was a very modest guy. He rarely talked about this incident. He would surely bring it up if you asked about it, but Johnny was not the type of guy to go around saying, "Oh, Babe Ruth was the guy who knocked the homers for me." In fact, I think the only 3 known interviews Johnny did was in the late 1980s, shortly before his death. And thank goodness he did that, so it could preserve an actual authentic account of what happened back then.
Now, he went on to live to 74 years old, right?
Yes.
And he survived World War II. But he was at death's door. He really was, after the kick in the head because of an infection. But some people argue that it was Babe Ruth, what Babe Ruth did, and the accolades and the focus it brought on Johnny that saved his life. Do you think that's true?
I think Babe Ruth played a big part in Johnny's getting well. I think part of that is because today, perhaps we see things differently. Perhaps maybe we're a little bit cynical of a culture, like, oh, that can't happen. Because I often think, like, what would happen to this boy if this happened today? Yeah. The next day, he'd be on Good Morning America. He'd probably be on Jimmy Kimmel. Yeah. So people might think it would be a publicity stunt. You got to keep in mind, Johnny never tried to capitalize on any of this. It was something he kept to himself, and Babe Ruth only mentioned it a few times afterwards as well. Mm-hmm. But the relationship between Johnny and Babe was very personal. They wrote each other letters. Johnny would later visit Babe Ruth at Yankee Stadium.
Yeah, and at the hospital. Let's talk about that, because he was able to repay the Babe. 21 years later, what happened?
Yes, the story comes full circle. And at the end of Babe's life, Babe passed away, unfortunately, very young. When Babe was dying of cancer, Johnny went up to visit the Babe, actually close by on Riverside Drive, to lift his spirits. Mm-hmm. Just, I think, the year before Babe passed away in 1948. And a lot of people don't realize that. 21 years later, Babe gets to see the skinny little kid all grown up as a young man with his wife. And he wanted to show how proud he was of his accomplishments in life, and I think he wanted to repay the Babe back.
All right. Well, it's a very interesting documentary, Andrew. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you, Rafael.
And just a reminder for those of you watching at home, I'll knock a homer for you. The timeless story of Johnny Sylvester and Babe Ruth makes its 13th premiere on Friday, August 4th at 11 p.m. Check 13.org for other airings and streaming availability.